I'm Janelle, 27, and I still remember how the Tesla keys glinted in the chandelier light as my mother handed them to my sister. For graduating, she beamed before turning to me with a different expression. Next month, you owe $1,200 in rent. Despite working 2 jobs that supported our household, I'd become invisible in my own home. That night, I packed silently and left without confrontation. 6 months later, my phone displayed 35 missed calls from family. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt undervalued by the people who should appreciate you most. Growing up as the eldest daughter in what seemed like a typical middle-class American family, I always felt the weight of expectations on my shoulders. My parents, Diana and Richard Armstrong, made it clear from early on that responsibility was a virtue. But as the years went by, it became apparent that the family rules applied differently depending on which daughter you were. My sister Sophia, 5 years younger than me, emerged as the undisputed star of our household by the time she was in middle school. With her natural charm, effortless academic achievements, and social popularity, she quickly became the center of my parents' universe. While they attended every one of her debate competitions and soccer matches, my achievements at art club exhibitions often went unnoticed or were met with lukewarm praise at best. "You should focus on practical skills, Janelle," my father would say whenever I mentioned my interest in graphic design. "Art is a hobby, not a career." I started working at 16, taking a part-time job at the local mall while maintaining honor roll grades. My parents nodded with approval when I handed over my first paycheck to help with family expenses, but there was none of the enthusiastic pride they showed when Sophia brought home another perfect report card. The dynamics shifted dramatically during my freshman year of college. Dad's construction business hit rough waters after a major client filed for bankruptcy, leaving him with unpaid invoices and mounting debts. The financial strain became a constant presence in our home, like an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. "It's just temporary," Mom assured me, during a tense phone call to my dorm room. "But we might need a little help with Sophia's private school tuition this semester." That temporary situation stretched into months, then years. I took a leave of absence from college after my freshman year, promising myself it would only be for a semester or two. I moved back home and secured a full-time position at the retail store where I'd been working summers. The plan to return to school kept getting postponed. Each time I saved enough for tuition, another family crisis emerged. Dad's truck needed repairs. The roof started leaking. Medical bills piled up after Mom's minor surgery. Meanwhile, Sophia continued her educational journey uninterrupted. Her school expenses, extracurricular activities, and even her spring break trips remained sacrosanct in the family budget. When I finally found an affordable apartment across town and started making plans to move out, my parents called a family meeting. "We're still struggling financially," Dad explained, his expression grave. "If you move out now, we might lose the house." The guilt trip worked. I stayed and even took on a second job as a weekend barista at a local coffee shop. My weekly schedule became a blur of early mornings, late nights, and the constant smell of coffee beans and retail store perfume samples. By 26, I had been promoted to assistant manager at the retail store, earning enough to cover a significant portion of our household expenses. My small personal savings account held the dream of returning to school for that graphic design degree I still wanted, but it grew at a glacial pace. All the while, I watched Sophia flourish in college. Her social media was a highlight reel of campus events, study abroad in Italy, and internship opportunities. My parents spoke about her accomplishments during every family dinner, while my 60-hour work weeks warranted barely a nod. "Your sister has such potential," Mom would gush after reading Sophia's latest email about her business classes. "She's going to change the world someday." The implication hung in the air, unspoken, but clear. I wasn't going to change anything. I was the reliable one, the support beam invisible until something threatened to collapse. Despite everything, I tried to be supportive of Sophia. We had been close as children before the disparities in our treatment became so obvious. I sent her care packages during finals week and listened patiently to her complaints about professors who just didn't understand her vision. I tried not to feel the sting when she casually mentioned the spring break trip to Miami that our parents had helped fund. "You should come next time," she'd say, knowing full well that my vacation days were spent covering shifts for coworkers or catching up on sleep. As Sophia's graduation approached, the household buzzed with excitement. Mom ordered custom invitations, planned an elaborate party, and repeatedly reminded everyone within earshot that her youngest was graduating with honors. "We always knew she would do amazing things," she told our Aunt Margaret on the phone while I stood in the same room counting my tips from the weekend shift. The week before the graduation ceremony, I overheard my parents discussing Sophia's graduation gift in hushed tones. I caught fragments about investment in her future, and she deserves something special. Whatever they were planning, it seemed significant. Meanwhile, I received a different kind of conversation. "Janelle, Dad," said one evening as I was heading out for my closing shift at the coffee shop, "your mother and I have been talking. You're 27 now, and we think it's time you started contributing more formally to the household." I paused, keys in hand. "What do you mean I already pay for groceries, utilities, and gave you $1,500 last month for the property taxes?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, but those are irregular contributions. We think it would be better to have a set amount each month like rent. We can discuss the details after Sophia's graduation." That night, as I wiped down espresso machines and swept coffee grounds, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was shifting in our family dynamic. But even then, I couldn't have predicted just how dramatically things would change at Sophia's graduation dinner. Sophia's graduation day dawned bright and clear, a picture-perfect Saturday in May. I had requested the day off from both jobs weeks in advance, a rare full day away from work that my managers had granted reluctantly. The ceremony itself was a blur of black robes, flying caps, and the constant flash of cameras. I stood with my parents in the crowd, squinting to spot Sophia among the sea of identical graduates. "There she is," Mom squealed, pointing frantically as Sophia crossed the stage, her honor cord swinging. Dad wiped a tear from his eye while recording with his phone, and I clapped until my palms stung, genuinely proud of my sister despite everything. After the ceremony, we returned home to prepare for the celebration dinner. Mom had been planning this event for months, transforming our modest dining room into something worthy of a magazine spread. I spent hours helping her arrange flowers, polish silverware, and set up the extra table leaves to accommodate the extended family members who would be joining us. "The napkins need to be folded like this," Mom demonstrated, for the third time creating an elaborate fan shape. "It's the same design they use at La Maison, where we're taking Sophia for brunch tomorrow." I nodded and continued folding, ignoring the fact that I hadn't been invited to the brunch. By 4 o'clock, the house was immaculate, filled with the aroma of Mom's signature roast and the lemon tarts I'd baked at dawn before everyone else was awake. Guests began arriving at 5. Aunt Margaret and Uncle Paul brought an enormous bouquet. My cousins carried wrapped gifts with elaborate bows. My father's business partner Thomas arrived with his wife and a card that obviously contained a substantial check based on the way Mom's eyes widened when Sophia opened it. I had spent 3 months setting aside tips to buy Sophia's gift, a professional-grade drawing tablet for the graphic design minor she had discovered a passion for in her final semester. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I wanted to be supportive. The tablet had cost nearly $900, a significant chunk of my meager savings, but her genuine excitement when she opened it almost made it worthwhile. "This is amazing, Janelle," she exclaimed, hugging me briefly before moving on to the next gift. Dinner was served at 6:30, a multi-course affair that Mom had prepared with my help. As we settled around the extended dining table, Dad stood up and tapped his glass for attention. "Today is a special day," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Our Sophia has completed her business degree with honors, and her mother and I couldn't be prouder." Glasses raised all around the table as everyone murmured agreement. I lifted mine too, smiling at my sister across the table. "We've always known that Sophia was destined for great things," Dad continued, "and as she begins this new chapter, her mother and I wanted to give her something that represents our faith in her future." Mom stood, then reaching into her pocket. The smile on her face was radiant as she held up a set of keys with a distinctive logo that made my stomach drop. "For graduating," she said, placing the Tesla keys in Sophia's manicured hands. The table erupted in gasps and congratulations. Sophia screamed in delight, jumping up to hug both parents. Aunt Margaret's eyebrows nearly disappeared into her hairline, and Uncle Paul let out a low whistle. "A Model S?" he asked, clearly impressed. "That must have set you back at least $120,000. Dad nodded, beaming with pride. Only the best for our graduate. She'll need reliable transportation for her new job at Lancaster Financial. The job that Sophia had secured through Dad's golf buddy, I recalled. The entry-level position that somehow came with a corner office and a starting salary higher than what I made after 7 years of working my way up. As the excitement began to settle, Mom remained standing, her expression shifting as she turned to me. The table quieted, perhaps sensing the change in atmosphere. "Janelle," she said, her voice now businesslike, "your father and I have been meaning to discuss this with you. Next month you'll owe us $1,200 for rent due on the 1st. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt every eye at the table on me as the words sank in. "Rent," I repeated, my voice surprisingly steady despite the thundering of my heart. "Yes," Dad interjected. "You're 27 now, and it's time you contributed properly. You have a stable job too, in fact. Your sister needs to start her career right, but you're already established." Established. As if my assistant manager position and weekend barista job were the fulfillment of some grand ambition. Aunt Margaret cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Richard, Diana, isn't Janelle already contributing to the household expenses?" My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, she helps out occasionally with groceries and such, but nothing formal." The casual erasure of years of financial support made my chest tighten. The property tax payments, utility bills, grocery shopping, car insurance coverage, and countless loans that were never expected to be repaid flashed through my mind. "I see," I said quietly, stabbing a roasted potato with my fork. "When did you decide this?" "We've been discussing it for a while," Mom replied. "With Sophia starting her new position, we thought it was a good time to formalize arrangements with you as well." The stark contrast wasn't lost on anyone at the table. A $120,000 car versus a $1,200 monthly bill. A celebration versus an extraction. "The rent is actually below market value for this area," Dad added, as if he were doing me a favor. "And of course you'll still be responsible for your share of utilities and groceries." I nodded mechanically, my appetite completely gone. The perfectly seasoned roast might as well have been sawdust in my mouth. Around me conversation awkwardly resumed, though Aunt Margaret kept shooting me concerned glances across the table. Sophia, oblivious or indifferent to my situation, was already making plans to drive her friends around in her new Tesla. "The autopilot feature is insane," she gushed to our cousin. "We have to try it on the highway." For the remainder of dinner, I maintained a tight smile, laughing at appropriate moments and answering questions about my jobs with practiced enthusiasm. Inside, something had shattered, a final thread of hope that my parents might someday see me as more than a convenient source of income. As dessert was served, the lemon tarts I had woken up early to bake, I made a decision. The clarity of it was almost startling after years of uncertainty and compromise. I would not be paying rent. I would not be staying at all. "These tarts are wonderful," Janelle, Aunt Margaret commented, perhaps trying to bring me into the conversation. "You've always had such a talent for baking." "Thank you," I replied, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "It's just a hobby, though, not a real skill." Dad nodded approvingly at my echo of his frequent dismissal, completely missing the bitterness beneath the words. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I helped clear dishes and pack leftovers with robotic efficiency. My mind was already elsewhere, cataloging my possessions and making mental lists of what to take and what to leave behind. "Janelle," Aunt Margaret said quietly as she hugged me goodbye at the door. "Call me if you need anything, okay? Anything at all." Something in her expression told me she understood more than she was saying. I nodded gratefully before turning back to the kitchen to finish cleaning up after the celebration of the daughter who mattered. The house fell silent shortly after midnight. Mom and Dad had retired to their bedroom an hour earlier, exhausted from the day's festivities. Sophia had gone out to show off her new Tesla to friends, promising not to be too late, but unlikely to return before dawn. I moved through the darkened house with practiced quiet, having mapped out my exit strategy during the mind-numbing process of washing and drying the good china. My bedroom, once a sanctuary, now felt like a temporary storage space for the person I had been pretending to be. From beneath my bed, I pulled out the 2 large suitcases I had used for a family vacation to Florida 5 years ago. The trip had been Sophia's high school graduation gift, though I had paid for my own plane ticket. Opening my closet, I began the process of sorting through clothes, selecting only what I truly needed and valued. As I folded a worn but comfortable sweater, memories surfaced unbidden. My 10th grade art teacher, Mrs. Landry, telling my parents at a conference that I had extraordinary talent and should consider art school. Dad nodding politely before immediately asking about my math grade. The science fair where I won second place standing alone because my parents were at Sophia's dance recital. The countless evenings I spent helping Sophia with her homework after working 8-hour shifts. In my desk drawer, I found old report cards and certificates of achievement, saved perhaps as proof to my future self that I had indeed accomplished things worth recognizing. Honor roll every semester, perfect attendance. Employee of the Month certificates from my first year at the retail store. Beneath these papers was a small notebook where I had tracked my financial contributions to the household over the past 3 years. Not out of pettiness, but from a need to maintain some record of my existence, my impact. The total made me pause $36,422.17. Nearly all of my income after basic personal expenses. For what? To be handed a rent bill at my sister's graduation dinner. I set aside essential documents, birth certificate, social security card, bank statements, insurance information. Everything else could stay. Let them see the evidence of the daughter they had taken for granted. On a simple notepad, I wrote a brief message. I've contributed over $36,000 to this household in the past 3 years. Consider my notice given. I won't be paying rent, Janelle. No accusations, no emotional outbursts, just facts and a decision. As I continued packing, I unearthed items that triggered more memories. The sketch pad with designs for a family holiday card that was rejected in favor of Sophia's photo collage. The birthday card from Aunt Margaret with a note encouraging me to keep your dreams alive. The small savings account booklet showing my slow progress toward a return to college. My phone vibrated with a text response from Taylor, my friend from the coffee shop, who had immediately offered her couch when I'd messaged earlier. Doors unlocked whenever you get here. No rush, no questions. Stay as long as you need. The simple kindness brought the first tears of the night to my eyes. I blinked them away and continued my methodical packing. By 2 a.m, my car was loaded with everything that mattered: clothes, personal items, the important documents, and the small box of truly irreplaceable mementos. I took one final walk through my bedroom, now strangely impersonal, without the little touches that had made it mine. The house felt different as I moved through it for the last time, as if it already recognized my departure. In the kitchen, I placed my note on the counter where Mom would find it when she made coffee. I hesitated, then left my house key beside it. Closing the front door quietly behind me felt both terrifying and liberating. The soft click of the latch was the period at the end of a 27-year sentence. The night air was cool as I walked to my car, a used Honda I had purchased myself and maintained with careful attention to every oil change and tire rotation. Unlike Sophia's gleaming Tesla, it represented actual achievement paid for with countless early mornings and late nights. As I pulled out of the driveway, tears finally came in earnest. Not for the home I was leaving, but for the family relationship I had desperately wanted and never received. For the years spent trying to earn love that should have been freely given. For the sister who had once been my best friend before she learned to see me through our parents' eyes. The streets were empty at that hour, my headlights cutting through darkness as I navigated familiar roads that would soon become just occasional passages. I drove, mechanically, muscle memory guiding me while my mind processed the enormity of what I was doing. Taylor's apartment was across town in a modest complex near the community college. The parking lot was quiet as I pulled into a visitor space. For a moment I sat motionless behind the wheel, watching the dashboard clock tick over to 2:43 a.m. My phone had already begun to accumulate notifications. 3 missed calls from Mom, starting at 1:30. She must have gotten up for water and checked my room. A text from Dad. "Where are you? Call immediately." Nothing from Sophia. I turned the phone off completely. Taylor's door was unlocked as promised. She had made up the couch with fresh sheets and left a small lamp on. A note on the coffee table read, "Help yourself to anything. We'll figure it out tomorrow. Sleep well." I settled onto the couch without unpacking, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The borrowed space felt safer than any room in my parents' house had in years. As I drifted towards sleep, the emotional weight of the evening pressed down, but beneath it was something new and unfamiliar. Relief. For the first time in a decade, I had chosen myself. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges I could barely imagine, but it was mine to navigate without the constant drain of trying to earn approval that would never come. Morning would bring complications, confrontations via phone, and the daunting task of rebuilding my life from scratch. But for those few hours of early morning darkness on Taylor's couch wrapped in borrowed sheets and the quiet solidarity of true friendship, I slept more peacefully than I had in years. The first week at Taylor's small one-bedroom apartment was a crash course in adjustment. Her generosity was unwavering, but the logistics of sharing a space designed for one person required creative solutions and good humor. Bathroom schedule, she announced on day 3, posting a handwritten chart on the refrigerator. Not because I mind sharing, but because we both deserve hot water. That simple acknowledgement of my needs as equal to hers nearly brought me to tears. My phone remained mostly off, powered up only briefly to check for messages from non-family members and potential employers. The barrage from my parents was relentless, confused questions turning to demands, then anger, then attempts at guilt. How could you do this to us after everything we've done for you? Your sister is devastated. If you needed financial help, you should have just asked instead of running away. That last one had made me laugh out loud, a sharp, bitter sound that startled Taylor as she made coffee. My dad thinks I left because I needed financial help, I explained, showing her the message, after they handed me a rent bill at my sister's celebration for her free Tesla. Taylor's response was unprintable but deeply satisfying. By day 5, I had applied to 17 jobs outside my parents' neighborhood, focusing on positions that might utilize my self-taught design skills rather than my retail experience. The coffee shop manager had been understanding when I called to explain I couldn't return, and had even offered to provide a reference. "You were always my most reliable weekend person," she said. "Let me know when you're settled somewhere new." On day 8, I found a promising listing for a junior graphic designer position at a small marketing firm downtown. The required experience was 2 years, but the preferred qualifications included self-motivated individuals with demonstrated creativity, which described my after-hours design projects perfectly. I spent an entire day crafting my application, creating a portfolio from the freelance logos and promotional materials I designed for friends' small businesses, often for free just to build experience. While waiting to hear back, I scoured apartment listings, calculating budget scenarios on Taylor's borrowed laptop. My savings were modest, but carefully maintained enough for a security deposit and 2 months' rent on a small studio if I found something affordable. "Stay as long as you need," Taylor insisted when she caught me looking at listings. "Seriously." "I know," I said gratefully, "but I need my own space to really start over, even if it's tiny." She understood. Unlike my family, Taylor recognized my need for independence without taking it as a rejection. On day 12, the marketing firm called me for an interview. I wore my one professional outfit, a navy blazer and pants I'd purchased for management interviews at the retail store, and carried my portfolio in a folder I'd designed and printed myself. The interview was with Laura, a woman in her early 40s, with bright red hair and an assessing gaze that saw everything but judged nothing. "Your formal experience is limited," she noted, reviewing my resume, "but your portfolio shows real talent and initiative. Tell me why you're changing careers now." I had prepared a sanitized answer about seeking growth opportunities, but something in her direct approach made me opt for honesty. "I've wanted to do this since I was 16, I said. "Life circumstances made me postpone education and take more immediately profitable jobs. I've been teaching myself design principles in every spare moment, and now I'm finally in a position to pursue this professionally." She nodded, seeming to hear what I wasn't explicitly stating. Sometimes the scenic route gives you perspectives others don't have. We need someone who can start at entry level but bring fresh ideas. 3 days later, she called with an offered junior graphic designer starting at $38,000 a year with benefits after 90 days. The salary was slightly less than what I'd made combining my 2 previous jobs, but the regular hours and creative focus made it feel like winning the lottery. I accepted on the spot. The first apartment I looked at was in an older building 20 minutes from the office. The studio was small, just 400 square feet, but it had large windows, a functional kitchenette, and most importantly, it was mine alone. The rent was $850 monthly, leaving me enough margin to slowly rebuild my savings if I budgeted carefully. Moving in required another adjustment. After Taylor's cozy lived-in space filled with plants and colorful throws, the empty studio felt temporarily hollow, an unwritten page rather than a home. But that emptiness also represented possibility, a space I could shape according to my own preferences without considering anyone else's opinions. I bought essentials first, a futon that doubled as seating, a small dining table with 2 chairs from a thrift store, basic kitchen supplies. Each purchase was considered carefully, both for budget and for meaning. Did this item serve a purpose? Did it bring joy? Would it contribute to the home I was creating? The 4th of July arrived just as I was settling into both the new apartment and job. My phone lit up with family messages about the annual barbecue invitations that ignored my departure as if it had been a temporary tantrum rather than a fundamental break. Mom's making her famous potato salad, Sophia, texted, the first direct communication since I'd left. Everyone's asking where you are. I didn't respond, but the message lingered in my mind as I accepted Taylor's invitation to join her friends at a local park to watch fireworks. Surrounded by people who expected nothing from me beyond conversation and shared enjoyment, I felt the first real stirrings of independence. To new beginnings, Taylor said, handing me a plastic cup of supermarket wine as explosions of red and blue lit the night sky. To chosen family, I replied, a concept I was just beginning to understand. The marketing firm proved to be exactly what I needed professionally. Laura was demanding but fair, pushing me to improve while recognizing my efforts. My first assignments were basic layout adjustments, photo editing, simple logo refreshes. But each task taught me something new, and Laura made sure I understood the why behind every design decision. You have good instincts, she told me after I completed my first solo project, a brochure for a local credit union. Now you need the technical knowledge to support them. With her encouragement, I enrolled in night classes at the community college, working toward an associate degree in graphic design. The campus was lively, even in evening hours, filled with people like me who were pursuing education alongside full-time work. In my second month of independence, I finally made an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Melanie Warren specialized in family dynamics and helped me understand patterns I hadn't been able to name before. What you're describing is a classic golden child divided by scapegoat dynamic, she explained during our third session. It's not about you lacking value. It's about the roles your parents needed filled in their family system. Understanding didn't immediately heal the hurt, but it provided context that made the pain less personal. My parents' behavior reflected their limitations, not my worth. As summer transitioned to fall, my studio began to feel like home. I'd added small touches that expressed my personality, a vintage art print above the futon, a colorful rug found on clearance, potted herbs on the windowsill. The space was small but intentional, every item chosen rather than inherited or imposed. My first major project at work came in September, a complete rebranding for a local coffee roastery. Laura assigned it to me after I'd shown her some speculative coffee packaging designs I'd created for practice. They want something modern but warm, she said. Your aesthetic seems right for this client. The project consumed my evenings and weekends, but unlike the exhaustion of my previous jobs, this work energized me. I researched coffee culture, experimented with typography, and developed color palettes inspired by different roasts. When the client approved my concepts with enthusiasm, the entire office celebrated my success. Colleagues I barely knew stopped by my desk with congratulations. Laura took me to lunch and discussed increasing my responsibilities. "You've found your lane," she said. "Now we just need to help you accelerate." The contrast with my previous life couldn't have been more stark. Here, my efforts were not just acknowledged but celebrated. My growth was encouraged rather than seen as a threat or inconvenience. As my confidence grew professionally, I found myself healing in other areas as well. I made new friends through Taylor and my night classes. I went on a few casual dates, including 2 with Mike, a graphic designer from a sister agency who shared my interest in typography and indie films. The constant background noise of guilt and inadequacy began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of competence and self-trust. I began to recognize my own resilience, not as a burden I'd been forced to develop, but as a strength that would serve me throughout life. When October arrived, bringing with it the 6-month anniversary of my departure, I realized I hadn't checked my family messages in weeks. Curiosity, more than obligation, led me to review the backlog one evening. The tone had shifted notably. My mother's messages, once demanding and accusatory, now carried undercurrents of financial concern. The furnace needs repairs before winter. Your father is stressed about the bills. My father, typically less direct, had sent links to articles about family reconciliation and the importance of forgiveness. Sophia's messages were fewer but more revealing in their self-absorption. The Tesla needs some expensive maintenance, and Dad's freaking out about money. This is so unfair. When are you coming back to help? The expectation that I would eventually return to resume my role as family support system remained intact despite half a year of my absence. What had changed was my reaction to these assumptions. Instead of guilt, I felt clarity. Instead of obligation, I recognized choice. I could acknowledge their struggles without making them my responsibility. That evening, as I worked on a class assignment about visual storytelling, my phone displayed an unusual notification: 35 missed calls from family in the span of 2 hours. Something had changed, and whatever it was, they finally realized I wasn't coming back on my own. The 35 missed calls marked the beginning of a new phase in my family's approach to my absence. No longer treating it as a temporary situation that would resolve itself, they launched a coordinated campaign to bring me back into the fold. The first wave came primarily from my parents' urgent voicemails about needing to discuss the family situation and text messages, alternating between demands for explanation and expressions of concern about my mental health. "We're worried about you," my mother texted. "This behavior isn't like you. Are you having some kind of breakdown?" The suggestion that independence could only be explained by mental instability was so transparently manipulative that it almost made me laugh. The Janelle they thought they knew, the one who absorbed mistreatment without complaint, had been a survival mechanism, not my authentic self. Sophia's messages were less frequent but more accusatory. "How could you abandon the family like this? Mom cries all the time and Dad is stressed about bills. They did everything for us, and this is how you repay them." The selective memory required to frame our parents as selfless providers was impressive. I saved these messages but didn't respond to any of them. 2 weeks after the barrage of calls, I received a message from a different source. Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister, who had shown concern at the graduation dinner, reached out with a distinctly different tone. "Janelle, I hope you're well. No pressure to respond, but I wanted you to know I'm thinking of you and support your decisions, whatever they may be. Love, Aunt M." Her message stood out like a lighthouse in a storm of manipulation. After careful consideration, I sent a brief reply. "I'm doing well, building a new life. Thank you for understanding. Love, Jay." Through this small channel of communication, I began to learn what was happening at home. Aunt Margaret was careful not to pressure me, sharing information factually without emotional manipulation. "Your parents got the mortgage statement and seemed surprised by the amount she mentioned during one exchange. I think they didn't realize how much you were contributing." Another time, Sophia's car needed some expensive repair. Something about the battery system. Your father was quite upset about the cost. And later, your mother mentioned they might need to refinance the house. The payments seemed to be a strain now. The picture that emerged was of a financial house of cards that had been propped up by my contributions for years. Without my income supplementing the household, my parents were facing the actual costs of their lifestyle choices, including the extravagant car they had gifted Sophia. As this reality set in their messages to me, shifted from anger to financial concerns, thinly veiled as reconciliation attempts. "We should discuss the household budget as a family," my father wrote. "There are some decisions we need to make together." Together. As if I remained a stakeholder in their financial choices after being handed a rent bill. The next escalation came when my father showed up at the retail store where I used to work. The manager, Kim, called to let me know. "He seemed really confused when I said you no longer work here," she reported. "Then he got kind of angry, like we were hiding you. I just thought you should know." I thanked her for the warning and added the store to my mental list of places to avoid. The city was large enough that I could steer clear of my family's usual haunts, but their determination to find me was becoming concerning. Throughout this period, I maintained strategic silence with most family members. Aunt Margaret remained my only point of contact, a decision that clearly frustrated my parents based on the messages they sent her. "Tell Janelle we need to speak directly," my mother instructed her sister, a demand Aunt Margaret shared with me transparently. "I'm not your messenger service," she had apparently replied. "If Janelle wants to speak with you, she knows how to reach you." 3 months after my departure, a new wave of attempts began. Family friends started reaching out, clearly recruited for the cause. "Your mother is very worried about you," wrote Mrs. Patel, our longtime neighbor. "She says you've cut off all contact with the family." My father's bowling buddy sent a similar message. "Hey kiddo, your dad misses you. Whatever happened, family is family. You should give them a call." These well-meaning but uninformed interventions were easier to ignore than family messages, but they still created an emotional drain. Each one required processing, deciding whether to respond, usually not, and managing the resulting feelings. Dr. Warren helped me develop strategies for handling these intrusions without being derailed by them. "You're not responsible for managing their emotions about your choices," she reminded me during a particularly difficult week. "Their discomfort with your boundaries is not a sign that your boundaries are wrong." 4 months in, Sophia's approach changed dramatically. After weeks of accusatory messages, she sent something that seemed almost conciliatory. "I miss you. The house feels empty without you. Can we meet for coffee sometime? Just us." The request seemed reasonable on the surface, but experience had taught me to look deeper. Sure enough, her follow-up message revealed the true motivation. "I've had to get a part-time job at the mall because Mom and Dad say we need the extra income. It's so humiliating. My friends from college are all starting their careers and I'm folding sweaters at $22 an hour. You have to help fix this." The irony was almost too perfect. My sister, who had received every advantage, including a luxury car as a graduation gift, was now experiencing a fraction of what had been my reality for years. And true to form, she saw it as a problem I needed to solve rather than a natural consequence of family choices. I didn't respond to her either. 5 months after my departure, the situation at my family home apparently reached a crisis point. Aunt Margaret called me one evening, breaking our text-only communication pattern. "I thought you should hear this directly," she said, her voice concerned but calm. "Your parents received a notice from the bank today. They're behind on the mortgage, and if they don't catch up, they could face foreclosure." The news should have devastated me. 6 months earlier, it would have sent me racing to empty my savings account to save the family home. Now I felt a complex mix of emotions, sympathy for the stress they must be feeling, but also recognition that these were the consequences of their own choices. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said honestly. "That must be difficult for them." Janelle, Aunt Margaret said carefully, "I want to be very clear that I'm not telling you this to make you feel responsible. Your parents made their financial decisions, and it's not your job to rescue them. I just thought you should know because they'll likely escalate their attempts to contact you." Her understanding was a gift I hadn't expected from anyone in the family. "Thank you for respecting my boundaries," I said, my voice thick with unexpected emotion. "You deserved better," she replied simply. "I should have said something years ago." That night after we hung up, I sat in my small studio apartment looking at the life I had built in 6 months. The space was modest but entirely mine. My job challenged and fulfilled me. My savings account was slowly rebuilding. I had friends who valued me for myself, not for what I could provide. For the first time, I tried to imagine what returning to my family home would mean, surrendering this hard-won independence, resuming financial responsibility for people who had shown they didn't value my contributions, watching Sophia continue to receive preferential treatment while I was expected to sacrifice. The choice was clear, but that didn't make it easy. Despite everything, they were still family. Their struggles didn't bring me joy. The next morning, my phone displayed the notification that would finally force a confrontation: 35 missed calls from family overnight, followed by a text from my father that simply read, "We need to meet. It's urgent. Please." After consulting with Dr. Warren and considering my options carefully, I decided that a controlled meeting might provide closure, but it would happen on my terms, not theirs. I texted my father back with my first direct communication in 6 months. "I'll meet you at Riverside Coffee Shop on Saturday at 10 a.m. All of you can come. 1 hour only." Setting the boundary felt both terrifying and empowering. Whatever happened at that meeting, I would be walking in as a different person than the one who had slipped away in the night 6 months earlier. I arrived at Riverside Coffee Shop 30 minutes early on Saturday, a strategic decision rather than an anxious one. The extra time allowed me to secure a corner table with good sightlines to both exits, order my drink a simple black coffee that would require no refills, and center myself emotionally. Dr. Warren and I had spent our most recent session preparing for this meeting. Remember that you're not responsible for managing their emotions, she had reminded me. You get to set and maintain your boundaries regardless of how they respond. I had dressed carefully in clothes that represented my new life, professional but creative, a far cry from my former retail uniforms or the invisible practical clothes I'd worn at home. My hair was styled differently, too shorter and more confident, small changes that reflected larger transformations. At 9:55, my family arrived as a unit. My father entered first, scanning the shop with the air of someone used to controlling situations. My mother followed, her expression a practiced blend of concern and reproach. Sophia came last, her face showing more genuine emotion than I had expected, a mixture of resentment and uncertainty. They spotted me immediately, but paused before approaching, perhaps thrown by the physical changes in my appearance, or simply gathering themselves for the performance ahead. I didn't stand or wave, allowing them to come to me. "Janelle," my mother said as they reached the table, leaning in for a hug I didn't reciprocate. Her smile faltered as she straightened, glancing at my father. "You look different," she added, settling into a chair across from me. "It's been 6 months," I replied evenly. "Things change." My father cleared his throat, always ready to take charge of uncomfortable situations. "We appreciate you agreeing to meet with us. We have a lot to discuss." "I have 1 hour," I reminded him, glancing at my watch. "I have plans later today." This simple statement, the assertion that my life continued beyond their orbit, seemed to unsettle him. He had clearly expected me to make myself entirely available once contact was established. Sophia, never one for subtle approaches, jumped straight in. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? Mom cries all the time. Dad is stressed about money, and I had to get a job at the mall. A mall job, Janelle. It's humiliating." The familiar attempt to place responsibility for everyone's feelings and circumstances on my shoulders almost made me smile. 6 months ago, this approach would have worked flawlessly. "I'm sorry you're going through difficult times," I said, meaning it despite everything. "But your employment situation is not my responsibility." My mother's expression shifted from practiced concern to genuine indignation. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you respond. You abandoned your family without warning." "Without warning," I repeated, keeping my voice level despite the surge of emotion. "Mom, I spent years supporting the household financially while my own goals were put on hold. When you handed me a rent bill at Sophia's graduation dinner after giving her a Tesla, that was the final message I needed about my place in this family." "The car was a graduation gift," my father interjected, as if that explained everything. "And the rent was reasonable for the area." "You were 27, for God's sake. Most adults pay rent." "Most adults aren't subsidizing their parents' mortgage and their sister's education for years," first I countered. "The issue wasn't the rent itself, Dad. It was what it represented in the context of everything else." My mother leaned forward, switching tactics. "We've been so worried about you, honey. Disappearing like that, cutting off all contact. It wasn't like you. We even wondered if you were having some kind of breakdown." There it was, the suggestion that mental instability was the only explanation for my independence. I had anticipated this approach and prepared for it. "I'm actually doing very well," I said calmly. "I have a full-time position as a graphic designer now. I'm taking classes toward my degree. I have my own apartment. I'm the healthiest I've been in years, both mentally and emotionally." My father frowned, clearly not expecting this response. "You're working as a what? What happened to your management position at the store?" "I left it to pursue the career I've wanted since I was 16, I explained. "The one you always told me was just a hobby, not a real skill." Sophia shifted uncomfortably, perhaps remembering that she had adopted graphic design as a minor in college with full parental support, despite it being my long-standing interest. "Well, that's good, I suppose," my mother said uncertainly. "But we still don't understand why you cut us off completely. Family disagrees sometimes, but they don't just disappear." I needed space to establish my independence, I said. Based on past patterns, if I had announced my plans or stayed in contact, you would have found ways to make me feel responsible for solving the family's problems. That's ridiculous, my father scoffed. We've only ever wanted what's best for you. Did you tell our relatives I was having mental issues, I asked, directly changing the subject. The momentary flicker in my mother's eyes confirmed what Aunt Margaret had hinted at. We were worried about you, she said defensively. Your behavior was so out of character. So, that's a yes, I noted. You told people I was unstable rather than acknowledging that I might have valid reasons for leaving. My father, growing increasingly frustrated with his inability to control the conversation, decided to get to what was clearly their main agenda. Look, Janelle, what's done is done. We can discuss all this family therapy stuff later if you want. Right now, we have a more pressing issue. The bank has started foreclosure proceedings on the house. And there it was, the real reason for the 35 calls and sudden urgency to meet. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, echoing my response to Aunt Margaret. That must be stressful. They exchanged glances, clearly thrown by my failure to immediately offer solutions or assistance. We need your help, my mother said, her voice softening into the tone she had always used when asking me to solve a family problem. We've fallen behind on the payments, and with the current interest rates, refinancing is difficult. My father jumped in with specifics. We need $12,000 to bring the mortgage current and stop the foreclosure process. Then we need you to move back home and resume contributing to the household expenses. The directness of the request was almost refreshing after years of emotional manipulation to achieve the same goals. That's not possible, I said simply. The table fell silent. My refusal, stated plainly without excuses or apologies, seemed to stun them more than anger or accusations would have. Sophia recovered first. What do you mean it's not possible? You have a job, you have savings, you've always helped before. I mean that I won't be doing that, I clarified. I spent years putting my life on hold to support the family financially. That period is over. My father's expression darkened. So that's it. You're just going to let your family lose their home because you're holding a grudge over a rent request. This isn't about a grudge, I said evenly. This is about recognizing unhealthy patterns and choosing not to perpetuate them. You have options, Dad. You could sell the Tesla and use that money to catch up on the mortgage. That's Sophia's car, my mother exclaimed, shocked at the suggestion. Yes, I agreed. A $120,000 gift that could now help solve the family's financial crisis. That seems like a logical option to consider. Sophia looked horrified. You can't be serious. That car is mine. It was a gift. And the $36,000 I contributed to the household over 3 years, I asked. What was that? That was different, my father insisted. You were living in the house, using utilities, eating food. So was Sophia, I pointed out. But she received cars and tuition payments while I received rent bills. My mother, sensing that the financial appeal wasn't working, tried another approach. Janelle, beyond the money, we miss you. You're part of this family. Whatever issues we have, we can work on them together. 6 months earlier, this appeal to family bonds might have swayed me. Now, with perspective and distance, I could see it for what it was, another attempt to draw me back into the established dynamic. I appreciate that, I said, not unkindly. But if reconciliation is something you're interested in, it would need to happen separately from financial entanglement. The two issues can't be bundled together. My father, clearly frustrated, made one final attempt. The bank needs co-signers for a new mortgage application. With your income, if you co-signed, we could likely get approved. The request was so outrageously inappropriate that I almost thought I'd misheard. You want me to co-sign a new mortgage on a house where I don't live, have no ownership stake, and have been explicitly told I would need to pay rent to occupy? I asked, making sure I understood correctly. It would be for the family, my mother urged. We're all in this together. I looked at each of them, in turn my father annoyed that his financial solution was being questioned, my mother employing emotional appeals that had worked reliably for years. Sophia sullen at the suggestion that her car might need to be sacrificed. No, I said firmly. I will not be co-signing any loans or providing money for the mortgage. Those decisions are yours to make as homeowners. So you're just abandoning us, Sophia demanded, tears forming in her eyes. Whether they were genuine or strategic was impossible to determine. I'm not abandoning anyone, I corrected her. I'm establishing healthy boundaries. There's a difference. After everything we've done for you, my mother began falling back on her most reliable guilt trigger. That's exactly the point, I interrupted gently. What exactly do you think you've done for me, Mom? Because from my perspective, I've been the family's financial safety net for years, while receiving minimal support for my own goals and dreams. The blunt assessment silenced her momentarily. I didn't come here to argue, I continued. I agreed to this meeting because I thought it might provide some closure. I want you to understand that I'm not coming back to the previous arrangement. I've built a new life that I value with people who respect my boundaries and support my goals. So that's it, my father asked, anger barely contained. You're choosing strangers over your own family. I'm choosing health over dysfunction, I corrected him. I'm choosing reciprocal relationships over one-sided ones. I'm choosing to value myself when others won't. I glanced at my watch, noting that our agreed hour was nearly complete. I need to leave soon. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss that isn't about financial assistance? The question hung in the air, highlighting the fact that their entire agenda had centered on solving their money problems rather than repairing our relationship. My mother made one last attempt. Will you at least think about what we've said about coming back home? I have thought about it, I assured her. Very carefully. My answer remains no. As I stood to leave, I felt a strange mixture of emotions, sadness for what our relationship could have been, but also a profound sense of peace. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had stated my needs clearly and held firm despite pressure. I wish you all the best, I said sincerely. I hope you find solutions that work for your situation. As I walked away from the table, leaving them sitting in stunned silence, I realized something important. I had entered the coffee shop as Janelle, independent adult with boundaries, and I was leaving the same way. The pull of old patterns had not been strong enough to drag me back. Outside in the crisp autumn air, I took a deep breath and felt the weight of the past 6 months of years of obligation and unmet expectations begin to lift. Whatever happened next with my family would unfold without my playing the role they had assigned me. I had finally truly left. 1 year after leaving my family home, I stood in my new apartment admiring the morning light filtering through curtains I had chosen myself. At 28, I had created a life that reflected my values and priorities rather than others' expectations. The past 6 months since the coffee shop confrontation had brought significant changes, both professional and personal. 3 weeks after our meeting, Laura had called me into her office at the marketing firm. The Hillcrest campaign was a huge success, she said, referring to a project I had led for a local restaurant group. The client specifically mentioned your design work in their feedback. We'd like to offer you a promotion to full designer with a salary increase. The bump to $45,000 annually represented more than financial security. It was tangible recognition of my skills and contributions, something I had rarely experienced in my previous life. My night classes were going equally well. With a solid B+ average despite the challenges of working full-time, I was on track to complete my associate degree by the end of the year. My professors had already encouraged me to consider transferring to a 4-year program afterward. The promotion had allowed me to move from my studio to a 1-bedroom apartment in a quieter neighborhood. The extra space wasn't extravagant, but it included room for a small desk that I had converted into a proper work area for personal design projects. In the corner beside the window sat an easel, a birthday gift from Taylor, who insisted that I reconnect with the pure joy of creating art without commercial considerations. Not everything has to be practical, she had said, echoing words I wished I had heard in childhood. My social circle had expanded naturally as I settled into my new life. Through work classes and Taylor's introduction, I had built connections based on mutual interests and respect rather than obligation. Most significant among these new relationships was Anthony, a web developer I had met during a collaborative project between our agencies. Our relationship had developed slowly and thoughtfully over 4 months. Unlike previous brief dating attempts, this connection felt grounded in mutual respect and genuine interest. Anthony understood boundaries in a way that suggested healthy relationships in his own past, and he supported my career ambitions without feeling threatened by them. I like watching you succeed, he told me once when I apologized for talking too much about a project. It's like seeing someone in their natural habitat. Through Aunt Margaret, I occasionally received news about my family. After our coffee shop meeting, my parents had indeed been forced to make difficult decisions. They had downsized from the family home to a 3-bedroom apartment across town, a significant adjustment after decades in a spacious house. Sophia had been required to sell the Tesla, though she had managed to negotiate keeping $15,000 from the sale while the rest went toward the family's debts. She now drove a used sedan and worked full-time at a retail management position while completing her master's degree part-time. My mother had taken a position as an administrative assistant, her first job in over 20 years. My father had finally accepted a business partner to help stabilize his construction company, surrendering some control in exchange for financial stability. These changes didn't bring me joy, but I recognized them as necessary adjustments to reality rather than hardships I had caused. For years, I had enabled an unsustainable lifestyle by absorbing costs that should have been shared or reduced. My departure had simply removed the buffer between my family's choices and their consequences. Aunt Margaret remained my only contact with the family, a relationship I maintained with clear boundaries. We met monthly for lunch conversations that were increasingly about our own lives and interests, rather than family dynamics. She had become something between a friend and the supportive family member I had always needed. "They're adapting," she told me during our most recent lunch. "It's not easy, but it's necessary. Your father even mentioned that he's sleeping better without the constant financial stress." The holiday season brought its own challenges. Declining the family Thanksgiving invitation had been easier than I expected, perhaps, because I had a genuine alternative dinner with Anthony's family, who welcomed me with warmth that asked nothing in return. Christmas required more deliberate boundary setting. I sent cards to my parents and Sophia with brief, pleasant messages, but declined the invitation to attend family celebrations. Instead, I hosted a small gathering in my apartment for Taylor Anthony and 2 friends from work, an evening filled with laughter and genuine connection. Therapy with Dr. Warren continued, though we had reduced the frequency to twice monthly. Our sessions now focused less on crisis management and more on building a vision for my future based on my own values and desires. "What does success look like for you now?" she asked during a recent session. Not what would impress others or fulfill obligations, but what would bring you genuine satisfaction. The question itself represented progress. A year earlier, I wouldn't have believed I had the right to define success on my own terms. "Balance," I answered, after careful consideration. "Creative work that challenges me, relationships that are reciprocal, financial security without sacrificing everything else, and time and space to just be myself without apology." She nodded approvingly. "That sounds like a life worth building." On the anniversary of my departure, I took a personal day from work and spent it in reflection. I visited the art museum alone, something I had always wanted to do, but never prioritized. I had lunch at a cafe that served elaborate desserts, ordering tiramisu without justifying the expense. I walked through a park, as winter gave way to early spring, observing the first tentative buds on the trees. That evening, back in my apartment, I opened the small box of mementos I had taken from my childhood home. Among them was a drawing I had created, at age 12, a surprisingly skilled portrait of our family that had hung briefly in the hallway before being replaced by Sophia's participation certificate from a science fair. Looking at the old drawing, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: grief for the family dynamics I had wanted, but never experienced compassion for the child who tried so hard to earn love through achievement and sacrifice, but also profound gratitude for the strength that had finally allowed me to choose a different path. The journey of the past year had taught me that love should not require erasure of self, that boundaries are not selfish but necessary for genuine relationships, that sometimes walking away is the strongest choice you can make. My phone buzzed with a text from Anthony still on for dinner tomorrow. "Mom sent homemade cookies for you." Such a simple message, but it represented everything I had gained: connections based on genuine care rather than obligation or utility. I replied with a yes and a heart emoji, then returned to my reflection. The life I had now wasn't perfect or without challenges. I still had moments of doubt and occasional pangs of guilt. The programming of a lifetime couldn't be undone in a single year. But each day brought new evidence that I had made the right choice. Each boundary respected each goal achieved, each genuine connection formed, helped heal another small piece of the past. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about what I would tell others facing similar situations. That self-worth isn't determined by others' treatment of you. That it's never too late to rewrite your story. That chosen family can be as meaningful as biological ties. That healing doesn't mean forgetting but learning to carry the past without being defined by it. Most importantly, that you deserve to be valued simply for who you are, not for what you can provide. I fell asleep with a sense of peace that once seemed impossible in a home that truly felt like my own, surrounded by evidence of a life built on my own terms. Have you ever had to walk away from someone or something that was hurting you? What gave you the courage to make that difficult choice? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of strength and transformation. Remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it brings some comfort if you're facing difficult choices of your own.